New videos every day.
So I'm John Breeding. It's June 20th, 2012 in Austin, Texas. This is the fourth of a series on my new upcoming book, Leaving Home, The Journey from Birth to Adulthood. Now we're going to segue into part 2, which is 3 chapters on basically teachings about working with children and helping children become their fullest and most powerful selves. I've got a little quote that kind of speaks to the general theme of part 2 about helping prepare children for leaving home. That's the theme of part 2. This one's from James Baldwin, 1961. Children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them. That's a fundamental teaching there. Joe Pierce calls it the model imperative, but the basic practical thing is that, way more important than what you say or how you discipline or what you advise is what you model. As Baldwin says, children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they have never failed to imitate them. So take that to heart. First chapter in part 3 is called Remembering Essence, Parenting as Emotional Healing. I've got a chapter on that on my website, and it's the basic teaching, parenting as emotional healing, that in order to really be an engaged and involved and loving parent, you have to keep healing anything inside of yourself that gets in the way of doing that, right? So I'm going to share with you a few ideas about that. But again, let's start with a couple of quotes. Again, my friend Leonard Frank has contributed the quotations. The first one is from philosopher Philo. This is from the 1st century, so 2,000 years ago. What God is to the world, parents are to their children. That should be a little bit of a humbling and unsettling truth to realize and to be a little aware about the power that we hold and to use that thoughtfully and lovingly and judiciously. What God is to the world, parents are to their children. And the next one comes from Carl Jung, a great psychologist. This one's from 1934. If there's anything that we wish to change in our children, we should first examine it and see whether it is not something that could better be changed in ourselves. Anything that you want to change in your children, first take a look at yourself. That's the basic teaching of parenting as emotional healing. And it's definitely true here. Related to that is the idea that however you want to help your children, where you see them having a hard time, whether that's with anger or whether that's with shyness, whatever the pattern is that sort of tears your heart a little bit to see your child struggling with it. The best way you're going to help them is by looking at that quality inside of yourself and freeing it up. If your child has a little trouble with shyness, go make a few new friends. Decide you're going to go out to the park and you're going to talk to 3 people that you don't even know. Whoa! And maybe that's really hard for you. So you free that up inside of yourself. And that's the best way to help the child. That's a teaching there. And that's Jung is saying that, the corollary of that, of course, is, and what Jung's talking about, is that the things that irritate us in others, it's always a good idea to consider how we are with that quality inside of ourselves. So related to this idea, I got a teaching from Kay Levine, who had a book called Tomorrow's Children. She designed a formula for parenting, and it's not the formula that's so important, but it's a good guide to kind of look at how to approach this basic idea of parenting as emotional healing. So the first thing, step 1, is to recognize when you're thrown out of your loving or your ability to think well about your child. That should be the default state. I'm in love with my child and I'm thinking well about them. If they're having a hard time, I'm still loving them, but I'm thinking about how to help them. When you're thrown out of that, meaning you, instead of love, you feel disgust, or instead of thinking well, you're just stuck in this thing, that's an indicator. And it indicates not that much really about your child's behavior. They're just doing the best they can with what they're trying to work out at the time. What it points to is a state inside of you that you're responsible for. The tendency is to blame the child. Say, I'm mad because of your bad behavior. But the truth is, I'm mad because I'm having a hard time with something that this is really doing to me. So the first step is step back, recognize that you're thrown out of your equanimity. Okay, that's step one. Step two is to basically, with that, say, okay, so who am I in this situation? You know, I recognize I'm not the loving father I think of myself as. Who am I? Well, I'm a guy who wants to strangle my child, you know. Or I feel like a little kid that just wants to go hide in a corner and disappear because everything's hopeless and overwhelming. Right? Step two. Step three. What behavior or quality are you reacting to? You know? Are you just really been out of shape because your child's lying? Okay. Then take a look. Then step four goes to take a look at how you are with that quality inside of yourself. How honest am I in my life? How honest am I with the facts? How much do I withhold and not tell things and keep it hidden? That's another form of lying. Maybe I'm honest about the facts like Joe Friday and Dragnet, but I don't talk about what I'm really feeling. There's different levels of honesty, right? Or maybe you're reacting to your child's powerful defiance and anger, right? Then maybe it's called, how am I with being powerful? Do I express my anger in a safe and appropriate way? Do I stand up against injustice, or do I just stay quiet and passive? You work on that. You recognize that quality. You look at yourself in relation to that quality. And then step five is you start to do the inner work. You know, feeling the feelings, looking at what's driving that, working to free it up, healing your own distress, and learning to act in a way that's more out of truth and more out of power, as opposed to this distress. There's many, many forms of inner work, but that's the idea. You work on it. You take responsibility for it so that you can free yourself up to then be in a loving place, being delighted with your child, and thinking well about them if they're having a hard time so that you can come up with a creative way to help them, right? That's it, basically. And then the last step is then to say, oh, thank you, Buddha. You know, your child is your teacher. You know, your child is your spiritual teacher. Really, they're pointing to the places inside of you that need some work. Okay, that's the formula. And I've got it on my website. I've got a whole chapter on that. Parenting is Emotional Healing on the wildestcults.com website. So it helps to remember where we get re-stimulated, where we get reactive, and to face that. Because that's where you transform. That's parenting as an ordeal. That's parenting as emotional healing. That's where the work is to be done, right? The child is the catalyst for that. And they're also, fortunately, the motivation. Because a lot of times we're more willing to work on these things than if they just showed up inside of ourselves, outside of relationship with our child. Even in our marriage, maybe, you know, there's something about parenting and the love of that child that makes us more willing to really face things that usually we would avoid facing. The child is both the catalyst and the motivation. So that's a good thing. Because the teaching is basically you either suppress your child or disconnect from them, or you transform yourself. You work on this, you know, if you want to stay close to your child and not disconnect or not shut them down. That's how it works. Here's how I said it in the dedication to my book, The Wildest Colts Make the Best Horses. This is the dedication. To my children, Eric and Vanessa, for the intense demand of their spirited natures, which has forced me, kicking and screaming, to transform myself and my life in ways I could never have imagined again and again and again. That was in the mid-90s when my children were just on the verge of sort of pre-adolescence and early teenage years. I'd already gone through that. Now, you know, 15 years later, I can say it's still true. I have a chapter in my Wildest Colts book. It's called Eric and about Eric, but really it should be about John, because again, it's really about this process for me. That's a little story of when my boy was between 4 and 7 years old. He was really angry and powerfully angry. And both of us parents thought, man, he has a personality and an ego bigger than the two of us combined. He's so powerful. Because I was like a passive. I had adopted a kind of a passive approach to life in adaptation to my own particularly challenging growing up situation. And I spent my adult life kind of getting some power back, right? But Eric was intimidating and powerful, and I was just overwhelmed. I mean, sometimes I did want to throw out a limb, and a lot of times I just thought it was just too much, right? So it's a story of how, but I was so determined to stay close with him and help him with that, and also stay close, and I had a lot of support and help, not the least of which was with the play days and play groups of the reevaluation counseling community. But in any event, I was determined to stay close, and in order to do that, I had to struggle with him, and then I had to get support for myself about how that was so hard, where I would cry or I would just throw my own rages, and gradually free that up. And what I eventually realized was I had the thought one day of whoa, what if I'm really more like him than I am different? What if I really have this powerful force inside of me too, What would that mean? Well, it would mean that I was so shut down. I was so coming from a false place. I was so out of touch with that face of my true self, that powerful force, that it was like, man. So the process of doing that work and determining to stay close to him, I gradually had to free that up, And can't say I'm fully free and as powerful as I need to be sometimes, but I can be a force, and I can be angry, and I can stand in the face of someone else's anger. And when a young person is angry and powerful, I can just be, wow, you're powerful, and hang in there with them. And I'm going to stay with you and help you with these hard feelings. And I can even hold them if they're raging and trying to tear me up. I can say, I know you don't really want to hurt me, so I'm just going to hold you while you work through these feelings. I can do those things now, right? But I had to work through that inside of myself to do that. So that's the idea of parenting as emotional healing. And we'll continue this conversation next time. Thank you very much.